Bill Barr or okay.
Whoever's up for it, yeah.
All right.
Does he still have a job?
All right. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. All right. So welcome everybody. I don't know if I should tell everybody to mute if they're not one of the speakers at this point. Probably doesn't matter. Welcome to the December SABR Boston meeting. I hope everybody is healthy and safe and doing well during this terrible year, but we can still talk baseball, and that's a good thing. And I'd like to start off tonight before we get to the main event. I want to introduce one of our Boston SABR leaders who is also a healthcare hero. This is Joanne Holbert, who, if I get this right, has been a nurse for at least 35 years. Is that right? 36.
That would be all of EMS and nursing.
EMS and nursing, right?
EMS and nursing.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so only 30 as a nurse, maybe, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And
25,
she actually was going to retire this past winter, and COVID got her back on for another 8 months.
Mhm.
She actually just left her last position on my mother's birthday, October 24th.
Oh,
And well, she's a little younger than Mom. And she's incredible. I mean, I could just go on and on about what a great hero she is, but she is also a SABR hero who has spent many decades collecting wonderful nuggets of baseball history, including this wonderful poem that I think would be a wonderful way for us to start off tonight's event. This is called Passing Reflections by a gentleman you might have heard of, but I'll let Joanne introduce that.
Sure. Okay. This was a poem that I just happened to download and copy. It was just a couple of hours before Saul got a hold of me and asked me for a poem in order to do this. So I think that there was a little bit of the fates that have intervened here that brought this out, because it's not one that I would usually do, but for some odd reason, I decided that I would download this one. It comes in handy because it really kind of is apropos to the subject that's coming up. Okay, Passing Reflections. The longer that I live and see the brief rewards of skill and power, the more and more it seems to me how vain the judgments of the hour. I've seen raw luck inscribed as skill. I've seen skill wrecked of all its worth. By luck, we're peering from some hill. I heard fate laughing in its mirth. I've lost to luck. I've won by luck, as any other cove has done, to hear again the ancient muck, the same old yop, the best man won. All those who ride the skyline heights are targets for a surer aim, and those who dwell on lower flights have more fun often in the game. That's Grantland Rice, and it was printed in many different newspapers because it was in his syndicated column, The Sportlight. And this one I found in the Boston Daily Globe, December 12th, 1922.
Wow. Well, thanks, Joanne. That was beautiful.
How is it that all of sports journalism has forgotten that?
Yes, well, why do we no longer have somebody like Dan Shaughnessy waxing poetic after any great event or small event like they used to, you know? I mean, there was no end to it. He wrote thousands of poems. Same with Ring Lardner. Ring Lardner did the same thing until he soured after the 19 Black Sox and all that. He decided to go hang on a Broadway instead. But all of those people used to start all of their columns with a poem. I mean, Grantland Rice was really over the top on that. I mean, you know, the Sportlight, my God, there's tons of them that I've collected out of it. But this one, I mean, this was kind of just uncanny because, you know, Saul mentioned, hey, you think we want to start with a poem? And I knew it was going to be about blowouts. And I'm looking at this like minutes before and going, my God, this could be about blowouts.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, yeah, it could be blowouts. So I think it came down from wherever it comes from that Grantland Rice has intervened on this one for us.
And it's almost 100 years. I mean,
that's right. Yeah, it almost is 100 years. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Joanne. And actually, we should probably start a tradition of a poem at the start of every Boston Sabre meeting.
Well, I
think?
mean, I did try. Yeah, I mean, I used to do that. I mean, I really did. And plus, also, of course, the Turnstile Journal, if you have not already gotten your copy on that, does have a lot of poetry. And we do have some really good poets in Sabre. You know, R.J. Lesh, who probably writes some of the best stuff that I have seen recently. And we always, you know, we have to get him to make sure that he gets some poetry into it. But he's written some fantastic stuff.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank you again for that. And, you know, please stay safe, Joanne, if they call you back to the front lines.
Well, I know. Oh, that's right. I would. I mean, I left reluctantly. It was not my idea, but hey, you know, I'll find something.
Next, I hope that many of you folks have already downloaded this wonderful book that we're going to be hearing about now. But the name of the book is Baseball's Biggest Blowout Games. It's a lot of fun. I've already been looking at it myself. And it is about if I'm not wrong, it is 120 total games, well, not counting the postseason, I guess, for the 4 biggest blowouts of all 30 major league teams since 1901. And some great little nuggets. I was happy to find that my favorite blowout game, not that I was at, but that I recollect, is the 29-4 drubbing of the Browns by the Red Sox in June of 1950, which of course came a day after a 20-4 game that didn't quite make the top 4. And some neat things about that game: only 9 players played for the Red Sox. It's incredible. No pinch hitters. And the starting pitcher went all 8 innings. It was at Fenway. Matter of fact, the Red Sox are one of 4 teams that these gentlemen found had all their blowouts at home, their top 4 blowouts. And there were 4 teams that had all their top 4 blowouts on the road. I think the 4 home teams is more impressive because they had to score all their runs in 8 innings. And the Red Sox that day did that on the, 3 home runs from Bobby Doerr. I think maybe a pair from somebody else, maybe Clyde Vollmer or Vern Stevens, one of those guys. And even the pitcher chipped in with a couple hits and 3 runs scored. So that was, and actually this is a neat stat. The Red Sox had a 12-game homestand. They had 127 runs, 11-point runs a game. They hit .302 that year as a team, and they still didn't win the pennant. Unbelievable. And the 29 runs they scored that game was I think it was a 20th century record, and it was the most in a major league game until 2007, when I believe the Rangers scored 30. But I don't want to take any more thunder away from these guys. It's a beautiful book. I think everybody should download it. And I really love that you have a lot of baseball cards in there. I don't know if you did that with or without the permission of Topps and other folks, but it's really lovely. Seeing color in a Sabre book, which I really enjoy. And without further ado, I'll introduce you to Sabre director and author Bill Nowlin and fellow co-authors Andy Sharp and Tony Valley, discussing one of the newest Sabre publications, Baseball's Biggest Blowout Games.
Let me start by welcoming everybody myself. I was the editor of this book, as always, helped by a couple of other folks, Len Levin and Carl Reachers, who do fact checking and copy editing respectively. The interesting thing about this book, when I added it up, Saul, you mentioned there are indeed 126 games in here, 4 for each of the 30 franchises, and then 6 selected postseason games. 77 different Sabre members collaborated on this book. I think we set a record. We try to get at least 25 or 30 members involved in any book. And as Alan Cohen knows, we try to keep people from writing more than 3. Some of us, like myself and Alan, would go on and write quite a few if we could, but we try to spread the wealth around, so to speak. And So we had 77 different people. I mean, that's astonishing to have that many people collaborate as authors or editors. And, Len and Carl didn't write anything for the book, but they were essential to the completion of the book. SABR pays a lot of attention to fact checking and trying to present things correctly, and both of them help out tremendously in that regard. I think I don't know where the idea for the book came from. I was the one that launched the idea, but I don't know what it was I can't remember what it was that spurred the idea for me, but it came up, and it was obviously a big hit. Probably the next book that SABR comes out with, or one of the next two books, will be a companion of baseball's greatest comeback games. And it'll be the same kind of approach, not quite as many games, but because we took a slightly different tack to it. This one, how did we rate the games, the top four for each franchise? It did it mathematically, basically by run differential. So the game that you mentioned, Saul, which was the biggest Red Sox win as a blowout, was 29-4. That's 25 runs, the difference between the winning score and the losing score. And what I did is I contacted Retro Sheet, and Tom Ruane there simply ran me up. Didn't take him much time at all, but he just went to their database and ran something that ranked every game, and by run differential. So I went through and picked out the top games for each franchise, and it was brainless in one sense. We then had some decisions to make. That's one of the reasons we started with 1901, is because the Retro Sheet database doesn't go back any further. We didn't include Negro League games because as of today, still the Negro Leagues are not major league franchises. That may change in the next few months. But I did write a chapter on Negro Leagues blowouts so that they were represented in the book. And actually, I'll go for a little tangent here. It was kind of an interesting thing I found when I was doing that. I found one doubleheader that took place on, what was the date? June 9th, 1946. I wasn't there either, but Asheville, the Asheville Blues in North Carolina took two games from the Montgomery, Alabama Dodgers. It was a doubleheader. The first score was 24-0. The second score was 22-0. They kind of let up, I guess.
The same team won both games.
That's one thing. There's no mercy rule in professional baseball, but that's like 46-0. And as far as I know, it ended at the end of regulation. They didn't just all walk off the field in disgust or anything. But I mean, what a score! I don't know. It was just an amazing thing. We did have some ties in terms of run differential. So there would be a time that a team might win one game 18-1 and another one would be 19-2. So each of those were 17 runs. And that's when some value judgments came in. It depended on the situation. If we were talking about a team like the Athletics that were in Philadelphia, then went to Kansas City, then went to Oakland, and it was a choice between a Philadelphia Athletics and an Oakland Athletics, I just picked the Oakland because they were more recent and figured that would relate more to people today. So those were just judgment calls. There were a couple of other times where it was like home or away. Well, I'd pick the home one just to do it. And then some other ones just for one reason or another. A couple cases, I think we already had one of the games written, and we're always trying to encourage new games. So we just commissioned a new one and added that to the stockpile. There were 6 postseason games as well. And those just wanted to have some representation for the postseason. There might have been a little bit of bias in the selection of postseason games.
Yes.
In that 2 of them were Red Sox wins. The 23-7 win against the Indians in 1999, and then not that long ago, the 16-1 win over the Yankees just 2 years ago
Oh,
in
yeah,
the AL Division Series.
Mm.
Now, of course, the Yankees are represented in the book too. They won some games. So it's not like there's anti-Yankee bias or anything like that. But they've got their 4 games. There are games among these that I did tend to pick home games if it was a tie situation, just because I figured that, if you're a partisan of a team, say you're a Tigers fan, or you're a Kansas City Royals fan or something like that, you'd probably rather, you might have been there or you might have be from those cities, and it just somehow, you might emotionally have a stronger feeling about it if you're reading about a game that was won in your team's home stadium. It's a whole different experience for fans, of course. If you were for each one of these games, there was a winner and a loser. If you were a St. Louis Browns fan that happened to be at Fenway Park on that date and you saw your team lose 29-4, you were probably a little discouraged.
Or the day before.
Or the day before, as you said, it was really astonishing. I went back and the 7 games in a row, these were the scores of the Red Sox and their opponents. The first, all but one was the Red Sox win. 11-5, a win. 11-9, a win. 17-7, then 12-0. Then the Red Sox, for some reason, lost 8-4. Then they won against the Browns 20-4, and then that wasn't enough, so they came back and won 29-4 in the last of those 7 games. They then lost the next 4 games after that, so they were kind of petered out or something like that, I guess. I don't know what the story was.
I have to mention that my dad was at one of those 2 Browns games.
Oh, really?
Wow.
And arrived late. I think it was the 20-4. He would have been, the way he described it, I think he was at the 20-4 game. And he got there like in the 2nd inning and then scored a bunch of runs in the first. And it was like, whoa, we should have gotten here on time.
Well, this particular game, nobody scored in the 1st inning. It was kind of an interesting phenomenon. Neither team scored in the 1st inning. Then the Red Sox scored 8 runs in the bottom of the 2nd. They scored 5 more runs in the bottom of the 3rd, 7 in the bottom of the 4th. Here they were at the end of the 4th inning, and they already had 20 runs.
Wow.
I can look up the 20-4 game and see if they scored in the 1st inning.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
That would clinch it. I'll do that.
They didn't score when they scored 2 more in the 5th. Then they didn't score in the 6th. They added 2 more in the 7th, and then they scored 5 runs in the 8th inning. And I guess they decided not to play the bottom of the 9th because, as we know, they already won the game.
So, Bill, did anybody try to figure out, why in a game like that, especially coming after a 20-4 game, they didn't take some of the starters out? I mean, I've seen this wonderful photo of Ted standing in front of the scoreboard in the top of the 9th when it's 29-3. I think the Browns got a run in the 9th. And, and I think the great George Sullivan said in a caption, "What on earth is Ted Williams doing in this game?"
Well, if you were Ted Williams and you already were 8 for 9 or whatever he was,
yeah, okay,
come out of the game.
Right, all right, that's a good point. But maybe somebody that didn't have as much street cred, Al Zarilla probably couldn't tell McCarthy or whoever was managing, leave me in.
Alex Cora would have pulled out the whole lineup by the 5th inning, probably, because he believes in giving players time off.
The 29 game. In doing a bio of a guy named Tom Ferrick, a relief pitcher, later a major executive, the Browns actually brought him in to keep the Red Sox from getting 30 runs because they didn't want to be embarrassed to be the first team to give up 30 runs. And Ferrick, normally you wouldn't bring in one of your first line relief pitchers in a blowout game like that, but they did.
How many pitchers pitched in that game for the Browns? Anybody remember? Was it like 8 or 9 or?
I don't
can't believe it that was it Chuck Stobbs or whoever it was, Pat Dobson for the top.
There were only 4.
Wow.
There was Cliff Fannin started. He gave up 8. Then Cuddles Marshall, everybody's favorite, he gave up 9. Sid Schacht gave up 9, and then Ferrick came on, pitched 2/3 of an inning, didn't give up any.
No.
Yeah, he saved the day.
Yeah.
And
Imagine,
did
it could
they
still be
specifically
going.
did it to keep the Red Sox from scoring 30 runs.
Right.
Saul,
It was the
you know,
It was the Orioles that ended up losing that game
Yeah.
a few years ago, 30-3.
Yeah.
Mark,
So-
what- yeah,
Saul, you know, in the NFL, it's rare when a team is leading by a lot of points that they take out the quarterback. It's rare. They leave
yeah.
for some reason. They leave the quarterback in.
Well, Belichick certainly always did with Brady. It's crazy.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really
You
good
could
point.
take them out and bring them back in again, right?
That's true. But
Of
they leave
course.
him in.
Right. Unlike in baseball, right. Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
One of my favorite games that was kind of a Red Sox blowout game was didn't make the book because the Red Sox only won by 17 runs. It was a game that some people here might have been at. I would have, except I sold my tickets to somebody else that day. It was against the Marlins on June 27th, 2003.
Johnny Damon.
Oh, yeah. Two
Yeah.
hits and the 3 at bats in the first inning.
He almost had a cycle in the first inning.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
He had
But-
three of the hits in the cycle.
Wow.
Just
Didn't
the
they
first inning.
lose? Didn't they lose 2 out of 3 games in that series?
Well, the Marlins were world champions that year, remember?
Well, they
Wow.
had 90 wins. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, really. I mean, let's be honest.
well, how many?
Hey, come on.
how
The
many-
six,
how many wins did the Dodgers have this year?
Minnesota Twins had 85 in 1987.
Yeah, I mean, Red Sox scored 14 runs in the first inning. So
Right.
if you got
Wow.
to the game like Eric's father in the second inning, you would have missed 14 runs. The whole game was over in effect. 10 runs before the first out.
Yeah, it was funny. Then there's probably, I don't have the book yet, but there's probably another game that you don't have. The Phillies beat the Mets in 1985. Was it like, maybe you do have it. There's a game where the Phillies beat the Mets like 26-7 or something like that.
Mhm.
And
That's
that is the
close.
first time that anybody ever hit 2 home runs in the first inning. Von Hayes hit 2 home runs in the first inning in that game.
Wow.
And I
20
remember that game that the Phillies were worried. Charlie Hudson was giving up so many hits and runs. They were worried that he might not make it through the 5th inning.
It was
Yeah, the announcers.
26-7
26-7, yeah.
in 1985. It's the second biggest Phillies blowout. The biggest was 2009,
Against the Reds?
22-1 against Cincinnati.
Yeah, yeah.
Did somebody chime in here and say that they were at the 23-7 Indians Red Sox game in the playoffs? I thought somebody said they were.
Yeah, I was.
Andrew Bloom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any memories of that game you can share with us?
Actually, I just ran I got an article from Richard Justice. It was in the Washington Post for that game.
He was an old colleague of mine at the Post. Yeah, a great writer.
Valentin, 2 home runs. Offerman and Nixon, 5 RBIs apiece.
Didn't Valentin hit like 700 in that series with like 9
Yeah.
RBIs? He was
They
amazing.
beat
in
up
the
on
postseason.
Cologne. I forgot all about that.
He was a great postseason hitter.
That was the
Valentin.
series where Troy O'Leary went nuts, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right.
And that's the Pedro game in game 5.
Oh, that was all those no-hit innings, unbelievable. And he was hurt.
And everybody was hitting before he came in.
Right, exactly. It was like 8-6 or something. Or yeah,
Right.
unbelievable. Pedro. Oh, Pedro, we're not worthy.
Here's Tony. Good to see you, Tony.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I was having a little trouble. I ended up dumping the original Zoom on there and downloading it again. So
Yeah, well,
hooray.
No, it was 8-8 in the
evening.
4th inning in that game. Somebody just chimed in.
Yeah.
And then I think the Red Sox must have won like 10-8 or something. I believe, because I don't think they scored much after that either.
No.
Well, yeah. No, I remember that last inning. I just remember it was like they won the series. Like they just went so nuts when Pedro. That wasn't the last game of the series. No,
When Pedro
Was it?
came in, it was the last
that
game.
was the last game of the series.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. That was even more
Yeah.
clutch.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Did in the 23-7 game, yeah, I know that Dave Burba pitched one of the games for the Indians. Did he start that game for the Indians, or did he start a different game? I just don't remember.
No, he pitched in game. He got hurt early in game 3.
All right.
They brought in Jarrett Wright on
All
short
right.
ground.
All right.
I'd like to share a Mets story here. It's in the
Mets, I
book.
can't believe that.
On page 219, it's the Mets score 19 runs and win over Cubs. The headline or story in the paper the next day was, Mets score 19 runs. Did they win?
Right.
And they did. It was 19-1 against the Cubs.
That was their first year?
No, actually it was in 1964
Oh, it was. All right.
at Wrigley.
All right.
They kind of blur together, right? Those first 3 or 4 years.
Yes, they do.
Having looked up the line scores, it's now my belief that my dad arrived late in the bottom of the second of the 29-4 game, and it was like 6 or 7-0 already.
Wow.
That fits the way he described it. It was definitely like second inning. It wouldn't have been third inning.
Uh-huh.
It would have been third inning. And the day before, they scored in the first and the third, and didn't score in the second.
Interesting.
So-
If you're already in there, can you look up the Red Sox score from June 9th, 1946? Because that was the date of that Negro League doubleheader. And I was just curious, for some reason that date rings a bell to me, like maybe it was the day that Ted hit the 502-foot home run or something.
Well, I can tell you there were no black players on the Red Sox in 1940.
Or any other
Really?
major league team.
For the next
Really?
14 years.
Yeah.
As an aside, they once asked Richie Ashburn why the Phillies didn't do better in the 50s after they won the pennant. He said, "We didn't have any black players. It's as simple as that." I mean, really,
He wasn't wrong.
he wasn't wrong.
Let me mention a couple other things, and then I'd like to hear from the other 2 authors that wrote up individual games. There were a number of games that made the book in which there were no home runs hit.
Wow.
Right? I mean,
Wow.
it can happen, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily because they were in the old days, because I did a thing, I looked by decade to see how many of the games that were 15 or more run differential. It didn't really matter all that much by decade. A little more towards the present time. There are also, of the games in the book, there were 8 of them from just the year 2018, just 2 years ago. Of all the games in the book,
Wow.
just things happen like that statistically.
Huh.
But just a large number of blowout games in that 1 year. Of course, the book came out it came out I don't know, maybe May this year or something, but it was put together through the 2019 season. And it was put together before we got to the end of the season. And near the end of that season, there were a couple of games that might have made the book, but they were just too late. And I don't even remember this year if there are any significant blowouts, but it is one of those asterisk years anyhow. So whatever. Somebody asked me at one point if there were more
Oh,
games.
yeah. Braves 29, Marlins 9.
9, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Some people asked me if there were games that happened more in certain months than another. And that was not the case either. They thought maybe when, you get call-ups in September or something and the team was out of it, they just wouldn't try as hard. They'd be trying to give their guys some work or something and ended up losing, but that doesn't seem to be the case. There were a couple instances like that Negro League doubleheader that this is just coincidence because they're separate individual games, but on May 20th, 1994, there were 2 blowout games that made the book. Seattle 19, Rangers 2, a home game, and Minnesota 21, Boston Red Sox 2 in Minneapolis.
Hmm.
So both of them home games, nice for the home crowd, but both on the same day. And then as it happened, same date, May 20th, there were 2 more games that made the book.
Hmm.
Out of the
Oh, wow.
thousands.
What year was that?
Over the century.
Yeah. Oh, just 2 different years.
May 20th, 1996, the Braves beat the Cubs 18-1. And 10 years to the day after that, May 20th, 2006, the Diamondbacks beat the Braves 13-0. It doesn't take as much to beat a Diamondbacks blowout, just 13 runs as it happens, but they're a much younger team. They haven't been around for as many years. So why don't we, let's go, Andy, you wrote up a game, and why don't you, it was the second biggest Red Sox blowout game. Let me actually just show you all about that 29-4 game. If you haven't seen it, it's the cover of the book.
Yep.
There's the scoreboard. This is not a picture of the scoreboard taken on that day. This is a scoreboard picture that I took earlier this year at Fenway. I wanted to, I knew the scoreboard was the same as it had been back then. So I talked to the guy that runs the grounds crew and another guy there, and they let me in.
Oh God, that is so cool.
That's
And,
amazing.
There's nobody around, but they set the scoreboard up with the exact same original score. I took a picture of it, and
Nice.
that's it. So
You should have dressed up like Ted and stood in front of it.
Yeah, well, I did get a picture in front of it, but not dressed like Ted. I'm a little shorter than him, and I also didn't have quite the talent. I did get a double once in Little League, but
Was
so-
Andy going to share his?
yeah,
title?
Andy, tell us the game you wrote, and tell us a little bit about the game.
Well, I did too, and you said
Yeah.
possibly mentioned the earlier one.
Yes,
I
do.
did a Braves game from 1915, the year
Oh,
after the
Boston
Miracle
Braves.
Yeah.
Was it at Braves Field or at Fenway?
Well, that's weird. That was the year that Braves Field opened,
Right.
and in August, and this game was actually in St. Louis
Oh, right.
about a
Covered the
month
road.
later. But so it was a road game. But the Braves had a pretty similar season as they had in 14. They had been way under 500, obviously, and came back and won by a lot, and then swept the World Series. They were still in contention in late September in St. Louis. They ended up winning this game 20-1. Rogers Hornsby was a rookie playing shortstop for the Cardinals, and he wasn't even hitting 200 at that point. He ended up about 240, but only in about 60 plate appearances. But they didn't have a lot of names on the Braves. Rabbit Moranville, Johnny
Evers.
Tinker Stavers to Shan, Johnny Evers.
Evers.
I'm getting old. But other than that, Hank Gowdy, maybe, really not any names you would know, but they were having a great second half, and they were about a half a game behind Brooklyn and 4 or 5 games out of first. And they made a run. They won 9 of their last 14, including a doubleheader sweep that day. They won the first one 20-1, and then took the second game. And they passed Brooklyn. And they finished second. I think they were like 11 games over 500, 82 wins maybe. But it was interesting. That was the last year, other than, and maybe somebody here knows this, that the Braves actually played some games in Fenway Park until 1946. I don't know if there was
Yeah, the
construction
green seats. That was the other in '46. The Braves repainted Braves Field, and the seats didn't dry in time,
Oh, okay.
so they had to have a few games at Fenway.
Yeah.
And they actually had a great PR stint, and they sent everybody could send in their dry cleaning bills. Billy Sullivan thought that up, and they got them from all over the country. Like people were like, there's no way they were at Braves Field.
But apparently in 14 and 15, the Braves did play quite a few games at Fenway.
And
So-
vice versa. Of course, the
Yeah.
Red Sox played the World Series in both
Right.
1915
Yeah.
and 1916
Weird-
at the
weird, yeah.
significantly larger Braves Field.
Yeah,
Biggest
yeah.
ballpark in the major leagues
Yeah.
for quite some time.
Attended, well, for I guess Municipal Stadium, Cleveland probably passed them at some point.
Yes. Yeah.
But,
And Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds were.
Yeah.
Although when they made the Polo Grounds bigger.
The other game the Red Sox game I did was 1940, and the Red Sox had a killer lineup that year, hitting wise. They had 4 Hall of Famers: Cronin, Fox, Bobby Dorr, and who's the other
Ted.
one?
The
Jeez, I
one with
should
the
know
9
this
on
guy.
his
Al Zarilla. Yeah.
No, they and even the outfield was Ted Williams, of course. I mean, what am I thinking? The outfield was Ted Williams, Doc Kramer, and Dom DiMaggio. I mean, a heck of an outfield. And they were They hit like 286 for the year, which was just a tick behind the Tigers, who won the pennant. And but it was a down year for them in between 4 years where they finished second, 39-40. I'm sorry, 38-39, 41-42. But they finished at this point of this game, which was late. This was the 27th of September, I believe. They were playing my Senators, but which is why I did this game. I wish it could have been the other way around, but anyway, and they were down 2-1 in the second inning, believe it or not, going to the bottom of the second.
Wow.
And they ended up winning 24-4. And they did take the Cronin took out a lot of his regulars about halfway through the game. But one thing that's weird, and I have not read enough of the other blowout games in this book, I'm sorry to say, to know this, but in modern times, usually you find like a spare outfielder or somebody pitches the last inning or so in a blowout like this. Apparently this didn't happen back then because no position player pitched anything in either of these games. But
There was wasn't there a blowout game? It must have been a blowout game when Ted Williams made his only pitching appearance. I believe it was also in 1940, and there's a great picture of him pitching.
Jimmy Fox pitched in 1 or 2 games.
yeah,
too.
Fox pitched more than just occasionally in his career.
Oh, with the Phillies, he came out of the bullpen like 20 times. In 1945, I think. Yeah.
But the weird thing we were talking about, I guess that Tony's game was the 29 run game. Is that correct? The big blowout we were talking about earlier. Well, anyway, the consecutive ones where they scored 20 runs and 29 runs. That took the thunder off this 40 game, the 1940 game that I did, because the previous game, or either the previous or the one after, they scored 16. So it was 24 runs and 16. So that 40 was not even a record. I don't think it was a record even then, but it was for the Red Sox. It was a record until those 20, 29, 20 games. So, but the 40 Red Sox had no pitching at all. I mean, Lefty Grove was 40 years old and he was really over the hill. They only had 2 guys that pitched enough innings to even qualify, for the 154, an inning per game.
Wow.
And they had Jim Bagby, who later was an all-star, but he hadn't reached that point in that game. He only won 10 games that year, I believe. Fritz Obermeyer was the guy, I guess.
Ostermuller?
Yeah, that's it. I should know these things off the top of my head, but he started and he was the winner. And I think he had a couple of hits too. I mean, everybody had hits, but it was, I'm sorry, somebody's going.
Yeah, I've got Ted Williams' pitching performance.
Oh,
it was
cool.
that year was he pitched the 8th and the 9th in a 12-1 loss to the Tigers.
At Fenway,
24th.
Right? Yeah.
First game of the
I
doubleheader.
wonder why they risked that, I mean,
Didn't he strike out Rudy York in that game?
He struck somebody out.
Yeah.
I could
I
get the
think it might have been
play-by-play.
Rudy York on like a knuckleball or something. Yeah.
Ted Williams was a pitcher in high school.
Right.
And he was just bugging Joe Cronin. Let me pitch, let me pitch, let me pitch. So he finally did once.
I guess you don't say no to Ted Williams. I mean,
Yeah, he was still young, but
Yeah.
he made it his first year, 145 RBIs. It's still a rookie record.
right. Led the league. Did he lead the league? I don't know. Did he lead the league with RBIs?
Yeah, it's a major league record.
No, for rookies, but I
he was
wonder
the
if he led
first
the
rookie
league.
that led the league
He did. Okay.
in RBIs, and the record for the number of RBIs by a rookie still stands.
I think Pujols might be second because he had at least 135 for the Cardinals.
Yeah.
Tony, what game did you write? I assume you wrote.
Yeah, so I wrote about a game in June of 1953 in which the Red Sox scored 17 runs in 1 inning against the Tigers, and they won 23-3. They scored the runs in 7th inning, I believe it was. Up to that point, it was a close ball game. It was 5-3. Well, after that, it wasn't 5-3 anymore. It was 22.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the one I wrote about. Would it be appropriate for me to begin talking about that now?
Yeah.
Tony,
Yeah.
is that the game where a bunch of guys came up and three times the inning, obviously?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I am not from the Boston area. I live in Silverton, Oregon, and am calling you from there. So I'm
Johnny Pesky played there, as you know.
I'm sorry.
Johnny Pesky played there.
Well, I
as
was gonna mention that in passing. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not. I mean, I like the Red Sox and I watch their games occasionally, but I'm not what I would call a Red Sox fan. Where I first encountered this game, I'm looking at the notes that I put together here. Where I first encountered this game was when I was a kid. I was reading one of those Gee Whiz baseball books, that kids read, and there was a little story in there about when they scored 17 runs in an inning, and I was, wow, that was amazing. So, periodically I would think about that game and so on and so forth. But I do have some connections to the Red Sox. Two of them are kind of cool, and one of them will probably cause some of you to go boo and hiss here. So the very first Major League Baseball game that I ever saw in person was in 1977. I lived in the Seattle area then, and went to a Boeing night. The Boeing Airplane Company had a night for their employees, and I went to the Boeing night game, the Red Sox and the Mariners. And the Red Sox won 2-0. They had like almost 60,000 people there, which was shocking in the Kingdom. Second thing I would say is, and this is where you'll go boo and hiss. So you'll remember, of course, Tony Conigliaro. When Tony Conigliaro,
Yeah, we're not going to boo Tony C. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What's that?
We're not going to boo Tony C.
Well, you're going to boo this part, though. Okay. So Tony Conigliaro was playing in a game in July of 1965, and he got hit by a pitch, and that broke his wrist, and he missed about 25 games. So the guy who threw that pitch was a guy named Wes Stock. Wes Stock was a relief pitcher at that time for the Athletics, but he had come up with the Orioles. But Wes Stock was a friend of our family. Wes and my parents went to high school together. They grew up in a little town in Washington, 300 people. His mom was the postmaster, and I was their paper boy for a couple of years. And we were all Orioles fans because Wes played for the Orioles. And so I'm an Orioles fan even now. Although I have several other teams that I watch. So kind of a boo hiss thing there.
Boo.
And then the last thing, is, as Bill mentioned, so I live in a town called Silverton, which is near Salem, Oregon. It's about an hour south of Portland, about 10,000 people here. And they used to have an American Baseball Congress, National Baseball Congress team, quite a good one. And Johnny Pesky played for them in 1938 and 1939. And something I did not know until I read the little SABR bio about Johnny Pesky rather, was that Tom Yawkey actually owned the little logging company here in town that sponsored the Silverton Red Sox, which is why they were called the Red Sox. And Johnny Pesky grew up in the Portland area, and he played for them. And so there's a couple murals around town. Bill tells me that he's been out here in Silverton and has seen the one mural with the Silverton Red Sox, but there's also a Silver Falls Logging Company, Timber Company mural in town as well. An old school log around there standing on a log in the middle of the mill pond and all that. So anyway, so that's some background about where this comes from. So my notes here, I spent about, I spent several hours, of course, like you do with one of these things, researching it and trying to find out some things. And one of the things that always strikes me about baseball games is that, it can be like an everyday game that not many people attend, like this one. This is a Thursday afternoon game, 3,100 people in attendance. But amazing stuff can happen in those games. And I've been in a couple of games in Seattle in the past where, not many people were around and some amazing stuff happened. So you never know when that's going to happen. And that's one of the great things I think about baseball is you show up and you just don't know what's going to happen. Another great thing about this game was even though this game was played about a year before I was born. So I was born in July 1954. But there were a number of players in the game, old school names that you'll recognize that I, immediately identified when I looked at the box score. So Johnny Pesky, obviously, Ray Boone, Harvey Keene, Walt Dropo, Ned Garver, Fred Hutchinson, the manager, they were all for the Tigers. So Johnny Pesky was not playing for the Red Sox in this game. And then for the Red Sox, you had guys like Billy Goodman and Jimmy Pearsall and Sammy White, who I'll come back to, Gene Stevens, Mark Grissom, George Kell. So, they were old school names. Some of them were occasional or regular stars. Some of them were, everyday players, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I've also noticed about baseball, and we tend to think of baseball as more of a cerebral sort of game, and the football is more emotional and basketball is more emotional, and that both football and basketball have a great deal of momentum involved. Well, baseball has that on occasion too. And this is an example of that. Sort of the modern players, and I listened to a lot of San Francisco Giants game, and they used to talk to Bruce Bochy, and he would, on the pregame interview, and he'd, occasionally make reference to keep the line moving, And in this game, in that inning, that seventh inning, that's what the Red Sox were doing. They were building on momentum. So they had, I think it was 23 people come up, 27 people, something like that. 14 hits in that inning, 6 walks. Whoa. And there was only one home run in that inning. In fact, only one home run for the game for the Red Sox, one for the Tigers. I mentioned the walks. So in that inning, there were 6 walks. Now, the first one was an intentional walk to Billy Goodman. The other 5 were not intentional. But 5 runs scored from those walks. So, they don't want you to walk. Pitching coaches hate it when their pitchers walk batters. Well, that's one reason why. Several Major League and or American League records set in this game. So Gene Stevens had 3 hits in this one inning. Sammy White scored 3 runs. Excuse me. This was, I think, his only All-Star season too. They scored 5 runs after 2 were out. Johnny Pesky played for the Tigers. He was a second baseman that day. I think batted second. He got 1 walk. Fred Hutchinson. So Fred Hutchinson grew up in Seattle. He's a famous Northwest name. Pitched mainly for the Tigers. He may have pitched for a couple of other teams. Yeah. He won 93 games, I think, in the major leagues. He was a fiery competitor. And where I first encountered Fred Hutchinson in a way that I could remember, I read the Jim Brosnan book about the 1961 pennant race for the Reds, and also his long season book about his 1959 season. And he'd gotten traded from the Cardinals to the Reds, and then shortly after that, Fred Hutchinson became the manager. And he had a lot of Brosnan was an average to above average major league reliever, and had a lot of good things to say, a lot of positive things to say about Hutchinson as a manager. But I also know that Hutchinson was a pretty competitive guy. A couple other things about this game. That had to bug Fred Hutchinson, because he loses this game 23-3. Well, the day before they lost 17-1. They were getting thumped, and they were in last place. It was interesting that they were in last place at that game, and the Red Sox were in 4th place. This was almost halfway through the season. And the Red Sox ended up the season right where they started, in 4th place. The Tigers, though, they improved to 6th. So they did better after this game. There was a definite Pacific Northwest flavor to this game. So Sammy White was born in Wenatchee, Washington, which is in central Washington. Grew up in Seattle. Played at Lincoln High School, which is not terribly far from where my wife, who's from Seattle, went to high school. Johnny Pesky, of course, we mentioned him, and Fred Hutchinson. So definite Pacific Northwest flavor to the game. If I remember correctly, in those days too, the Seattle Rainiers, I think, the AAA Pacific Coast League team, they might have been the Red Sox farm team then too, at the time of this game. When I was writing this story and submitted it for editing and whatnot, Bill was good enough to point out that Ted Williams was not in the game, which I just completely overlooked. He was in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, kind of a fallout or a thing that happened right after this game is that Al Kaline signed with the Tigers the next day. It was his first professional contract. So a lot of interesting stuff in this game, I thought.
Tony,
yeah.
Was this before or after, I believe the Tigers and the Red Sox made a huge trade? And maybe that's how Pesky got to Detroit. I think wasn't it like a 12-player trade? It was maybe the year before. Yeah, because
very well could be.
I'm
not up on it. I'm not up on it that much. I know that gigantic multiplayer trades were a thing.
Yeah.
In those days, I know there was a 17-player trade between the Yankees and maybe the Orioles.
Yeah. Don Larson was in that one. Yeah.
Yeah, Don Larson. I know that there was basically a revolving door between Kansas City and the Yankees there a little later in the 50s.
Yeah.
I know that anytime Frank Lane was a general manager, trades were going to happen, right? He's like this knucklehead that's the GM in Seattle right now. I mean, he keeps churning players, and I don't know. Does he get a commission on that? I don't know. Some of the trades that they make. So I'm not really a Seattle fan, but they're the closest major league team, so you can't help but read about them.
Yeah.
And I do go to games there. I have a friend who lives in Seattle and has a family member who works for the Mariners, so we get some pretty nice tickets as a result. And the guy who's the general manager there, he just keeps churning and churning and churning that lineup. At some point he'll leave it alone and they might be able to do something. I don't know. So.
Yeah, I don't know if Bill or anybody in the time we have left wants to say anything else about the book, or we could have Joanne do another poem, but I was curious.
I'd like to ask Andy if you had you finished or not, Andy. If you have more than you wanted to say, because we kind of went off on a tangent.
I was going to say one thing about most of you probably know, if the sacrifice fly rule had not been in effect in 40 and 41, that Ted Williams would have hit 413 because he had 8 sack flies.
Right.
And it reminded me, the reason I've thought of that is there was a non-sack fly in this blowout where the guy did not get credit for a sack fly, which would have been in many years before 1940 and all the years after 53 would have been no time at bat. And he did get an RBI, but it was counted as a time at bat. And Williams had 8 RBIs in 41 that wouldn't have been times at bat. And so he would hit 413.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
And there would not have been that drama when he came into the last day of the
exactly.
Yeah.
39966 or whatever it was.
You're right. Yes.
I'm curious how many people in this room, I know 2 of them are me and Bill, were at the 19-8 Yankees blowout over the Red Sox in Game 3 of the 2004 ALCS, which of course was the
I was.
And
last
Dixie
game
was-
the Red Sox lost that season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you
I was
stay
there
for
as
all
well.
9 innings?
I stayed for all
Yes.
9 innings, and
I did too.
yeah, I was in the bleachers, terrible seats for the first 6 innings. the last 3 innings, when everyone left, I moved down behind the Red Sox dugout, and I was standing on my feet applauding Tim Wakefield as he came off the mound in the 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
tell you, that guy, for what he did that day,
Yeah,
he
going
already had my
to
ever love and respect, but that was great.
He was going to be the starting pitcher the next
I
day.
know, the next day, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then the next game I was at, of course, Bill, was with you, game 5.
Yes, yep, that was
Yeah.
quite a game.
What a difference 2 days makes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was something else.
absolutely.
When
All right,
we-
well, Joanne, I mean, what are you gonna say, Bill?
We don't have to leave it's not like we have to leave at exactly 9.
We
Some of
don't.
us have things
Yeah.
to do, of course.
I've,
But-
Yeah, and I do, and I will be bowing out here momentarily. so,
Okay,
yeah.
maybe Joanne could read a poem, and then if a few people want to stay around for a few more minutes, we can, but we
Sure.
people have other things to do.
Yeah.
I've got from Baseball Reference some of the trivia points that were like, I've got the pesky trade.
Oh, when was
No,
it?
and who was in it?
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you. It's, let me do this to make sure I'm still on mic.
you
here,
gotta get
because I
yourself
got my
a
two
camera
computers.
on top of your monitor there, Eric.
What?
Because you keep having to look over to the side to look stuff up. I assume that you're on 2 different devices.
I am on 2 different devices, yeah. So
Yeah,
here's, I had it. Here's the trade. Come on, transactions. Here it is.
all right.
So Pesky, Dropo, Fred Hatfield, Don Lenhart, and Bill White to the Tigers for Hoot Evans, George Kell, Johnny Lipon, and Dizzy Trout.
Wow.
That's a big trade. Big
What's the
some
date?
names there.
What's the date of the
Oh,
trade?
that was mid-season the previous year, June
Oh,
3rd,
previous year.
52.
Okay.
So the 17 runs in an inning was almost exactly a year later, within
Wow,
a week.
okay.
Yeah.
And of
You
course,
know-
Ted did come back late in the 53 season.
He
And I
came
believe
back
hit
for the
about
All-Star game.
450.
He was at the All-Star game that year.
Yeah, and he hit like 450 in his last
Yeah.
20 games with like 10 home runs after not swinging a bat for 18 months.
You know,
But he wasn't there when that game was played that Tony
you
told us.
know,
I've also got Ted's whole pitching line, and it's an impressive performance.
Oh,
This is
give it to
really,
us.
so he got the side, he gave up a leadoff single in the 8th and to guys I haven't heard of and bottom of the order, and then got 3 easy outs. But in the 9th, he gives up a single to Mike Higgins, Pinky Higgins, holds Hank Greenberg to a single,
Wow.
gets out, strikes out Rudy York looking.
Oh, I got that right.
Yeah. The first run scores a Dutch Meyer, a ground out to third. And then he gets Bertie Tebbets on a ground out back to the mound.
Wow. That's
So
a pretty impressive hitters
That's
he's facing.
impressive for
Yeah.
a position player.
Wow. Okay, who was the only guy who got a hit off Satchel Paige in 1965?
Oh, I should know this.
Against when he came in at 59 years
Carl
old.
Yastrzemski.
Yeah, you got it, Mark.
Yeah.
It was a double, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
nobody
he
knows
actually-
how old. Nobody knows how old
He pitched
Satchel was.
3 innings against the
I
Red Sox,
know.
at least 59 years old, and he let up 1 hit.
Yeah.
Was the '65 Red Sox team that bad?
I don't think they were that bad. I mean,
No,
you had Tony C and
I know.
Yaz and
I think 65 was the year they started off playing really well. Lou Clinton was having a good season, and then
Uh-huh.
they collapsed in the second half.
Yeah.
I mean, I was there. I was 11. I was rooting.
Weren't they a 9th place team in 1966?
Yeah,
Okay,
but
Half
See,
the
I
game out
remember
last.
that. So I started watching baseball very seriously when I was about 10 years old, and was just totally enthralled by that 1964 National League pennant race.
Hmm.
And then you come around 3 years later in the American League. I was, again, one of these gee whiz things as a kid. Last weekend, and there's still 5 teams that, any one of them, if it breaks the right way, they could win. I was just like, wow, they play all these games and it's still this close. It's amazing. And it
Well,
still amazes me.
what's
Yeah.
interesting is in '66, the Orioles run away with the pennant,
Yes.
right? But the teams that land in 9th and 10th place are the Red Sox and the Yankees, right? Right? And I think the Red Sox I think the Yankees, one of those teams only plays 159 games. I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah, my Senators were 8th place, and they were only a half a game ahead of the Red Sox. They missed 3
Yeah.
games.
Right. And so the whole thing's, but nobody was lousy that year, right?
Yeah, no, the
It's-
Red Sox, I believe, were over 500 the second half of the year, or very close to it.
Well, and I think the Yankees landed in last place, but they weren't. They're one of the best in a 10-team league.
Yeah.
They're one of the best last place teams ever.
They were 72 and 90, I believe.
And that's very good for a
Yeah.
last place team
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
then.
But they were last place. They finished 10th, the New York Yankees.
Yeah, but the Red Sox
Now,
finished ahead of them.
I will tell you, I'm not a Red Sox, a big Red Sox fan, but I share your loathing of the Yankees. Share that.
Well, yeah,
The earliest you're doing the comebacks next. The earliest game I can remember is the legendary Red Sox comeback against, I'm not sure who the opponent was, but Jim Pagliarone hit a grand
Oh,
slam home
don't
run.
mention that game.
That-
No.
my dad and grandpa
Bill wrote
were
about it.
My dad
Is
and
that against the
grandpa were-
Mets? Was that right?
Senators.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a Red Sox win. Okay.
Yeah, Red Sox.
Okay.
My dad and grandpa were watching the game. I'm 7. They turned the game off in disgust. This is such a vivid memory. They turned the game back on 10 or 15 minutes later, and they're down only 4 runs, and the bases are loaded. And Pagliarone hits the grand slam, and they lose their minds. I'm 7 years old. So this is a sport worth becoming a fan.
Yes, yeah.
That game is my standard for the worst blown game of all time. The Senators were up 12-5 going to the bottom of the 9th. There were 2 outs and a runner on first, and they were up 12-6. The Sox won it 13-12 in 9.
Yeah.
Wow.
wasn't there a Seattle Cleveland
Bill
game
wrote about this.
like in the early aughts? The Seattle and Cleveland, somebody was winning by a ridiculous amount,
Yes,
and somebody came back and won 15-14 or something.
yes.
Yeah, Seattle.
Yeah,
in
it was,
that year, they won
Seattle
a
was way
record
ahead and
number of
Cleveland came
games.
back and won.
14 to
playing the
2,
Indians.
and Cleveland won in 11 innings.
Yeah,
That was that 01, the year that they won
01, yeah.
106,
that's the year they won that
16.
set the record.
Yeah.
The thing about those comebacks is that they can be measured with win probability.
Yes, obviously.
Ah, yes.
Now, what are the odds of winning 2 outs in the 9th, up 7 runs with a man on
So
first?
I remember a game the Red Sox were beating the Yankees about 9-0, and I think Clemens started it. And the Yankees came back and won that game like 11-10.
Winning, oh my gosh.
It was that game just sucked.
I don't remember that.
That's probably but on the flip end, and were we at this game together, Bill, or no? Maybe I was with Dick Johnson. In the ALCS, Red Sox were down like 7-0. It might have been to the Rays, and they came back and won 8-7.
I was at that game.
Was that the
I
game
was
where
rooting for the Sox that year. I was
JD
at
Drew
that
hit a
game.
grand slam?
Was that the 6th game?
Yeah, and then they
07?
lost
Yeah.
in game 7 to
You know, it's funny about that.
It was
My-
game 5.
My,
game 5.
Well,
Okay.
my brothers and I, the Phillies had already moved on. They'd already won the pennant. And my 3 brothers all said, "Oh, it'd be great to have the Red Sox against the Phillies in the World Series." I said, "No, you don't want the Red Sox. You want the Rays, because we'll never beat the Red Sox."
Huh.
They said, "Really?" I said, "I watched the Red Sox. I know how good they are."
That team was I thought
it's a
that
better
was
team than 07. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
the 07 team just
Yeah.
they won.
Yeah.
It was great, but
that game, I was with a buddy, and who sits down in the row behind us but his gastroenterologist and his wife. And they left the game like in the 5th or 6th inning. And Larry's like, "Oh God, the next time I see him, I'll get a follow-up appointment in a week. I'm just gonna lord it over him."
That's pretty funny.
Bill, in the great comeback games, the Phillies, there are 2 great comeback games, I think, in the 80s or early 90s. There's one game where the Pirates are just blowing out the Phillies. And Jim Rooker says, if we lose this game, I'll walk back to Pittsburgh. They lost the game. And then there's the great game against the Dodgers, where you can watch this on YouTube, where Tommy Lasorda just goes nuts. I think Johnny Kruk gets a home run late. I mean, it's just there's 2 different Phillies games that are just great like that.
Yeah, it
What
was
about
really
that Cubs Phillies
frustrating.
game? with the 23-22
well.
game.
Oh, yeah.
That,
Well,
and
that-
I believe at one point somebody was ahead by like 10 runs, right?
The Phillies were ahead. That's the Mike Schmidt
4 home runs.
Yeah.
four homer game.
I think there's a book about that.
There
game.
is a book about
Oh,
that.
is
game.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hold
there
on.
is.
And the Phillies
Look,
have another.
I have people arriving for dinner here in the
All right.
Great Pacific Northwest.
Thank
so
you very much.
Thanks,
I'm gonna
Tony.
say goodbye, and it was,
that's right,
it
it
was a
is.
treasure. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good evening.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice meeting you.
You know, when Tony got close to the camera, he looked a little bit like Harry Carey. I mean, with the glasses and the white hair.
Actually, has
Yeah.
anybody ever? Actually, it's funny. Has anybody ever? Did everybody ever meet Harry Carey in person?
No.
Yeah.
I was only twice. I've been to Hall of Fame inductions in 84 and 89. 89 was the Yaz and Bench, but I think Harry Carey was being inducted into the
Broadcast wing.
the broadcasters
Yeah,
wing.
yeah.
Harry
Yeah.
was not quite as good looking as that fellow. I'll just say
Yeah,
that.
well, maybe by that point, yeah. All right.
And his glasses were big.
Maybe Ernie Harwell is another one he kind of liked.
Maybe Ernie.
I met Harwell. He was a good looking dude.
Yeah. There was a reference that someone made, I think it was Tony just then, but Andy, when you were writing up that Boston Braves game from 1915, you did not have access to YouTube.
Right. right.
One of the great things about doing these games is looking at the old newspapers. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
so interesting. And the coverage was so extensive,
Yes.
pretty colorful, but still a pleasure to read.
And the cartoons. I mean, like in blowout games or comebacks, the cartoons are all the better, you know? I mean,
I
Yeah.
that's another thing I wish they had now.
I just traded emails
sometimes
about
you-
2 hours ago with Eddie Germano.
Oh,
The Boston Baseball Writers Dinner is canceled this year, and for the last 40 or 50 years, I think he has drawn a sports page type cartoon for the cover of the program. And when
Oh,
it got canceled, I asked Dick Favren if he knew how to reach him, and he did. And so I sent him an email. I told him I was going to miss his cover this year. He said, "Well, I'm 96 years old now, and that's why you haven't seen me around the park the last couple of years."
so Bill, what are the odds that I swear to God, I literally
Oh,
half an hour before this call was cleaning up my son's room because he's coming home from school. And of course, I've been using it as like a way station, you know. And I came across an Eddie Germano autograph cartoon of Yaz and, you know, like, not Yaz, Ted Williams. I believe from 41. And it has like a Ted Williams signature and a Johnny Pesky signature. And I don't know if they're real. Maybe you can figure it out. I don't know, but it's a beautiful cartoon. I mean, he's
Send me a
terrific.
scan. I'll give you a guess.
Wow, look at yeah, I will. Look at somebody. Floyd is coming a little late.
Yeah, I just saw.
Yeah. Actually, I got to bug out in a second. I'm sorry. You know, there's a town meeting on with Dr. Fauci.
oh
really?
wow. Oh,
Yeah, you know, I mean, from baseball to
that's cool.
COVID. I'd rather talk baseball, but my daughter wants to watch with me, so I'm gonna.
Well, maybe Joanne should read her.
Oh yeah, read the
Yeah.
poem. I'll stick
all
to
right.
that.
All right, I know this is a bit more heart-rending, but this is to illustrate that Grantland Rice wrote poetry other than about baseball. He was a huge golfer also, and he wrote a lot of golf poetry, a lot about other sports too. But he did go into other areas. So, but there's one poem which was not of his usual subject matter. But it's quite heartrending, actually. I don't mean to put a sobering note on all this, but this is just something to think about. Now, remember that, of course, he lived during the time of World War I and all, and this was published anyway, just a couple of years after the end of World War I. And the name of the poem is "The Two Sides of War." Okay. All wars are planned by older men in council rooms apart, who call for greater armament and map the battle chart. But out along the shattered fields where golden dreams turned gray, how very young their faces were, where all the dead men lay. Portly and solemn in their pride, the elders cast their vote for this or that or something else that sounds the warlike note. But where their sightless eyes stare out beyond life's vanished joys, I've noticed nearly all the dead were hardly more than boys.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really something. I mean, a lot of his poetry is rather sensitive in many different ways and emotional, even when it comes to do with baseball. When I came across this one, said this didn't fit the usual expected mold. If you do want a copy of that, it is easily obtainable. Just Google the title, The Two Sides of War, and Granlund Rice, and it does come up.
Joanne, did these appear in his columns?
Huh?
Did these appear strictly in his columns?
Yes,
yeah.
that one did. That was from, it was in the New York Tribune, first written, or at least that's who gets the line on it anyway.
Yeah.
March 26, 1921.
Huh.
Now, the thing is that a lot of times when I would come across a really good Granlund Rice poem, I would find it in several other newspapers, and I might list, 2 or 3 citations on where I found it. But Sportlight, that syndicated column, went all across the country, and a lot of the major newspapers had it. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds of poems, but that's what I really liked about the dead ball era reporting, and even a little before it. I mean, you would find poetry mixed in. Ring Lardner had a little comment about that in the Chicago Tribune, where he had put up this little scenario about a young cub coming out from the hinterlands. He's coming into the big city. He wants to be on the desk. He wants to be a sports reporter. And he says, "Okay, kid, how's your poetry?"
Standards have changed.
And maybe a little known fact, I don't know if anybody knows about this. This is one of those little historical factoids, but Ring Lardner spent 1 year in Boston as a reporter.
Yeah, I did know that.
Yeah, in 1911. Yeah. And he tried a few of his tactics that he was using on his reporting in Chicago. This is before he took over, the column that Hugh Keogh left when he died. But he had this long-running friendship with Schulte from the Cubs. Okay. And he had a whole bunch of this, over 120 4-line or more poems that were supposedly written by Schulte. We all know they weren't, but he would blame them all on him because the poetry was apparently so bad, it's excellent. It's excellent. And I have all 120 odd.
I have to see those at some time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've got the whole thing. I copied every one that I could find. And even one of them, and it got a little odd because around 1911 or thereabouts, he had one poem where he had mentioned being on the train and going through like Framingham. And I mean, I said, no, wait a minute. But he did attribute it to Schulte instead of to, now we know darn well that Ring Lardner was writing up all the poems, but they would make this whole separate genre that you can set aside. It's just the most fantastic stuff. But he did try some of the others. He tried to get one of the Red Sox pitchers to sort of take the place of Schulte in Boston. It never worked because I don't think the guy fell for it.
George Ruth, maybe?
No, it was it wasn't him. I'm trying. It was the one from Vermont.
Not Joe Wood.
Not Joe Wood. No, he was Vermont. Oh God, what was his name? It'll come to me. But
Collins.
Collins, yeah.
So I got a good Granlund Rice trivia question. Then I'm going to take off. Granlund Rice said the greatest football game he ever saw was a game, and amazing because I mean he covered God knows every game, all those Notre Dame games and everything. Apparently, he claims the greatest game he ever saw was a game played at, I believe it was played at Fenway Park. What game was it?
It was probably between like BC and Notre Dame.
Very close. You got one of the teams right.
BC.
Yeah, the other team is not exactly what you consider today a football power at all. I don't even think they have a team.
Yeah.
Middlebury
Georgetown,
College.
BC Georgetown. Was,
Georgetown.
so I know about this game because I wrote a series of stories about the 1940 BC Eagles, which was a national championship. Well, they were national champions in some polls. Other polls had Minnesota #1. Charlie O'Rourke was the quarterback, Chuck and Charlie O'Rourke. And in that game, they were winning the game. I think it was terrible weather. Georgetown, they're both teams, I believe, were undefeated. And if they won the game, they were going to go to the Sugar Bowl and face Tennessee, which they did, and they won that game too. But in this game, they were ahead 16. They were up 19-15, and there were like a minute left, and they had the ball on their own like 20-yard line or whatever. And O'Rourke, rather than on fourth down giving the Hoyas back the ball, he ran into the end zone and ran back and forth and was tackled with like 2 seconds left to give Georgetown a safety, and they won 19-18. And the way Grantland Rice described it was great. You got to look that up. Yeah.
Well, tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of a BC Notre Dame game that was played at Braves Field.
Oh, wow.
And I happen to mention a few things on the dispatch that I wrote for this week. That is in This Week in SABR, which will be
I haven't caught up to
tomorrow's
this week
edition.
yet. All right, I'm gonna have to look.
Yeah,
that up.
yeah. Well, mentioned a few things about Braves Field and everything, and that was the main thing. But that was the big news for December 4th, 1920.
Only one Brave left who played at Braves Field.
Yeah.
Did George Gipp play in that game, or was he ill then?
I wonder.
Yeah, if Notre Dame won, I guess they won it for him.
Yeah.
Is that
I think BC won that one.
Is it Del Crandall?
It is Del Crandall.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, I knew dozens of Braves players, and I can't believe there's only one left. I mean, it's unbelievable. Although a few Braves farmhands are still left, including Joe Morgan and Henry Aaron.
Oh,
Henry Aaron was signed by the Boston Braves, and yet another thing to think about if they had only stayed, that one more year. Because they talk about it, the 1 year turnaround. I mean, they went from a terrible, awful team in Boston in '52 to winning, 90 games like the next 10 years in Milwaukee. And in '53, I mean, like overnight, they just became a juggernaut. And that was even before they had Aaron. Aaron came up in '54, but Eddie Matthews hit 47 home runs as a 20-year-old sophomore.
Yeah, unless I'm mistaken, the Braves never had a losing season in Milwaukee.
And the A's never had a winning season in Kansas City.
Wow.
One of those.
Despite Satchel Paige.
I'll see you guys.
All right.
Matthews the
Thanks,
last.
guys.
Matthews was the last active Boston Brave to retire. Is that correct?
Ooh.
I
Thank you.
guess.
Yeah.
When did he retire? 68 or 69? I guess.
He played in '68 with the Tigers. I know
Yeah, he
that.
played.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess.
Don Larson was the last St. Louis Brown.
Joanne, so you did the Grantland Rice poem.
Yeah.
And it's funny, for years, Groucho Marx would sing, well, he did it a few times on like Dick Cavett. He would sing a song called Stay Down Where You Belong. And it's an anti-war song written by Irving Berlin during the First World War.
Wow.
And Groucho would come on and he'd say, "Oh, my friend Irving Berlin tells me I shouldn't sing this song. So I'm going to sing it."
I'm gonna sing it, right.
And
Absolutely.
because Irving never wanted it to be known that he actually had feelings about that maybe you shouldn't always be in a war. Because, later on, he writes God Bless America and all that, and he wants to be known as the most patriotic songwriter out there.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting story.
Oh, there's so many of them, you know, all the tiny little factoids. It always impresses me about the variety of ways that people can use baseball as and as an inspiration for looking at the world, actually, at a broader sense. Well, for instance, a lot of people even tonight, are very much into like history of games and stats and the players. You got all of that, but then there's also the history and the social aspects of the game and how it affected well, for instance, different minority groups or even women. For instance, is there a parallel organization, say, with football? Society for American Football Research. On
Yeah,
a
there
similar
is.
level.
There is. I think there
Professional
might be.
Football Researchers Association. I think.
Yeah. And I mean, is it as wide and varied? I mean, do they have women in football like we have women in baseball? I mean, it's just it always strikes me as that baseball has such universality in so many different ways. In that it plays a role in aspects in social life. It was used as a socializing and an Americanizing mechanism for immigrants when they came over.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, and that even started in the 19th century because there were teams that didn't want to have the Irish on. They didn't want Irish on their team until they find out how they could play. But they went through the same sort of had to jump the same hurdles that other minorities after them did too, for instance.
Well, when I was growing up, I don't know if other people, when I was growing up, like my dad played sports, so that was a positive there. But when we played sports and we were playing in school and all that, my mom said, yeah, this is great, but school's the most important thing, because she said that when she was growing up, Jewish boys did not play sports, and Jewish boys went out and got an education and became professionals. That's what she said. And she said, if you don't do it, the chances of getting a wife are gonna be slim. That's what she said. So I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, that's typical. It certainly wasn't. The Jewish kids that went through that. I mean, there were the Irish kids and the Italian kids. Everybody seemed to be jumping through different, the same hoop. Different people jumping through the same hoop. But just seeing how. For instance, I had interviewed a few local people in town. This was really kind of funny. I had gone up to the senior center a few years ago, and they wanted me to sit down and talk to the bunch of guys, because there were some of them that played, ball in the town and everything. So I go in there and everything is, okay, so where's the group that I'm going to talk to? So they usher me to the room and everything, but it's all women. And I said, well, what about the guys? They were across the hall playing pool and didn't seem to have any interest coming over. Says, oh, this is going to go well. Well, I sit down and I talk to the women, and let me tell you, they tell me all about how, watching the local guys playing baseball, or that they did it, say, in school, and the softball versus baseball and everything. One of them, this woman, she was 92 years old, and she tells me about the time that she was sitting on the stone bleachers down at Green Street, which is where the guys played and everything, the town teams and all. And she got hit by a foul ball. It was flown back and everything. She was knocked out. All right, so what happened? She's knocked out. She says, a couple of guys carried me home, put me into bed, and I woke up later. I said, my God, but she remembered my uncle playing on the town team and was telling all about that, and. I mean, when you think back of it, when was the first time that you had any inkling of baseball? When was it first mentioned? When did you ever hear about it? What was the first time you encountered it? How old were you? Was it because you played? And I remember my first encounter with anything baseball was from my uncle, who had played town team. He was a catcher. Of course, his nickname was Gabby. But anyway. And I remember, and be dating myself, and you can figure it out, that I remember being at the house, and he was lamenting the death of a Red Sox player, and oh my God, he could have been better than Ted Williams, blah, 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 and all this. He was so, he's so young and so terrible, all that. And I was thinking, in my young years, I was saying, gee, must be really important to play baseball. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I heard anything about baseball. And when I think of my uncle at that point, I hear his voice, his booming voice, and also the radio with a Red Sox game playing on the back, or it might have been Braves at that point too, but just the sound of baseball on the radio, and the effect on, the impression that it made, and realize, oh, there's something value about that. Something of value.
This is not necessarily true of people that are in their 20s and 30s these days.
No.
I know. Yeah.
I'll tell you, one thing, Bill calls it my pet project, this thing that I've been working on and off for a few years. But recently, during the pandemic, I did a little research about this group in San Antonio, Texas. They were called the Rambling Wrecks. They were a group of totally disabled World War II vets. So they were okay financially because they were being paid for by the government, but they wanted to do something with their lives and give back to the community. So they started sponsoring a youth all-star game. It was San Antonio versus South Texas. They started sponsoring it in 1949. The two top players went to the Hearst game in New York. They sponsored that game from 1949. And in the early years, they gave away a car at the game.
Oh, no kidding.
Everybody got charged $1 to go to the game. Kids got in free. And then they started having special guest stars. They had DiMaggio, that's Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams. One year they had Dan Blocker from Bonanza at the game. They continued on. The Hearst game stopped in 1965. It didn't stop the Rambling Wrecks. They continued until 1998. And there was a writer named Harold Sherwitz who wrote for the San Antonio Light newspaper. He was there for 60 some odd years as a reporter. From his age, he started there in high school at the age of 16, and he retired at the age of 77. But these stories that he wrote about the games and the Rambling Wrecks, you talk about the social aspect of it and bringing a community together. It was all there for those games.
Let's call this meeting to a close here.
All right.
And it's been great catching up with everybody, and let's do it again maybe next month. We're planning for SABR Day, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to start working on that.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Nice meeting you all.
Nice to see you or hear you. One or the other. Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Have a good night.